Welcome to this explainer. Let's dive straight into things today. We are looking at the post-method rebellion. Our textbooks, the new methods. We're going to be exploring a pretty massive tension in education today. Have we actually moved past strict traditional teaching methods, or do those methods just, shape-shift into those glossy, heavy textbooks sitting on your desk right now?
To really grasp this, I absolutely love this observation from educational theorist Dune McDonald. She pointed out that whenever a new curriculum change is proposed, it's essentially lobbed into schools like a disruption in a chicken coop. It causes this massive, frantic flurry of activity, feathers flying everywhere, before everything just eventually reverts right back to the normal routine. It just goes to show that despite the grandest visions from curriculum theorists, entrenched, everyday school practices almost always went out.
Which brings us to a pretty huge question. Are these constant modernist reform projects completely out of touch with how young people actually learn today? Seriously, we have to ask ourselves if this endless cycle of top-down reforms, the ones that rigidly regulate time, space, and how knowledge is delivered, is actually serving our students. Or is it just an outdated reflex of a traditional schooling system? You can actually see this exact kind of reform exhaustion historically just by looking at how fast policies shift. Take China, for example. Over just a few decades, their Ministry of Education speed ran through virtually every major educational trend. They pushed the direct method from 1912 up to 1949, then swung completely over to grammar translation in the 50s. By the 60s, they pivoted to the audiolingual method and finally landed on the communicative language approach by the end of the century. It is literally a perfect historical snapshot of a system just exhaustingly chasing after one singular, best method.
So, to make sense of this endless cycle, theorists Jack Richards and Theodore Rogers broke down this whole concept of a method into a strict top-down ladder. At the very top, you have the abstract theories of language. They called that the approach. That trickles down into the design and eventually lands right at the bottom on procedure. And that procedure level, that's exactly where the teacher steps in, expected to just execute highly specific, basically teacher-proof instructions.
And here is the absolute crux of the issue, the clash between that rigid, top-down modernist approach, which totally isolates theorists from the actual practitioners, and the bottom-up postmodern movement that aims to empower teachers. A conventional method dictates exactly what and how you should teach, giving you zero wiggle room. But the postmodern approach flips the script entirely. It actually authorizes you, the practitioner on the ground, to construct your own personal theories based on the reality of your classroom.
By the end of the 1980s, people had had enough, and this shift sparked a literal rebellion. B. Kumartavelu introduced what he called the post-method condition. And this wasn't just tossing another new method into the chicken coop. It was a search for an alternative to methods altogether. It championed teacher autonomy, making the case that educators can actually self-direct their teaching rather than blindly reading from a one-size-fits-all script.
He built this revolutionary pedagogy on three core pillars. First up is particularity, which just means language teaching has to be deeply sensitive to your local context, your specific learners and conditions. Next is practicality. This is about bridging that frustrating gap between theory and practice by encouraging teachers to build theories out of their own daily work. And finally, possibility, which ensures the pedagogy preserves and protects the identity, gender, race, and social realities of everyone in that room.
Now, what's crucial to understand is that these three Ps aren't just sitting in their own separate little boxes. Their boundaries blur, and they interact. They overlap to form one comprehensive system for autonomous teaching. You simply can't address the particular context of your classroom without it shaping your practical theories, and both of those are completely intertwined with the social possibilities and identities of your students.
But okay, right when academics were celebrating this newfound freedom and declaring methods dead, here's the massive plot twist. The grassroots reality was doing something entirely different, and it's actually perfectly captured by the Spanish word método. In the Spanish-speaking world, this one single word perfectly smashes two concepts together. It means a teaching method, but it also literally means textbook.
Which leads us to a really uncomfortable realization for modern classrooms. In English as a foreign language context, the idea of a single prescriptive method didn't really disappear at all. It just reincarnated as the global course book. I mean, teachers might swear they don't follow a rigid method anymore. But if a massive published series is dictating the entire flow of your classroom, hasn't the textbook secretly just become your method?
When you stack up the defining features of traditional methods right next to modern coursebooks, the similarities are honestly undeniable.
Big series like Headway or Cutting Edge secretly lay out exact, rigid structures. They slice the nature of language into tiny, discrete items, what Scott Thornberry famously calls grammar McNuggets. They enforce this cognitive model of highly proceduralized practice, and they cast the teacher into a super-controlled didactic role. The methodology is literally baked right into the pages.
Researcher R. Ekbari hits the nail on the head here. He bluntly points out that despite all this progressive academic theory floating around, our current era is completely defined by textbook-driven practice. Theorists argue that the global coursebook is basically a Trojan horse, smuggling those traditional top-down methods right back into our schools. The textbook authors, who are miles and miles removed from your local context, are essentially pulling the strings of your curriculum.
And if student teachers just blindly roll with these textbook methods without critically thinking about their own unique learners, it leads to this phenomenon perfectly captured by the Chinese idiom dongxi xiapen, that roughly translates to disastrously imitating others without any regard for your own features. A textbook written for a generic global audience just physically cannot account for the highly specific cultural and social dynamics happening in your individual classroom.
So how do we actually fix this? How do we avoid the textbook trap? Well, the student teachers need to follow a deliberate path to build their own teaching beliefs. First, you have to understand historical methods so you actually know what you're using or throwing away. Second, engage in critical reflection and observe your peers. Third, conduct action research based on your specific context to solve actual problems in your room. And finally, theorize directly from your own practice. Turn your daily, real-world experiences into your own methodology.
Ultimately, overcoming this textbook trap requires what N.S. Prabhu calls a sense of plausibility. This isn't about just blindly following a teacher's manual. It's about developing a subjective, deeply personal understanding of how your specific teaching creates the learning you want for your specific students. Because, as research continually shows us, good teaching can't just be reduced to a technique. It comes from the identity, integrity, and autonomy of the teacher.
So I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on before you step into your next class. Are you going to let a bound stack of paper, a globally standardized textbook, dictate your pedagogy and act as your stealthy method? Or will you embrace the post-method rebellion, do the hard work of context-based research, and truly empower your students by theorizing directly from your own practice? The future of your classroom really does depend on your answer. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.